The Blackjack Drifter was 3 days out from Kepler's station when the shadow fell across her hull. Pete Vargas saw it first on the proximity scanner. A shape so large, the system mistook it for a celestial body and tried to reclassify it as a dwarf planet. Then the shape moved. Dwarf planets don't do that. "Drealith Carrier," Cora Briggs said from the comm station. Her voice was flat, the kind of flat that takes effort. "Vanguard class. They're hailing us." Pete leaned back in the captain's chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose with both thumbs. The Blackjack Drifter was a cargo freighter. 60 meters of welded steel, recycled air, and engine trouble. It hauled grain supplements and medical plastics between human outposts that weren't important enough for military escorts. The Drealith taxing them was like a bear mugging a squirrel. Technically possible, cosmically embarrassing for everyone involved. "Open the channel," Pete said. The Drealith on screen was tall, angular, wrapped in a crystalline exoskeleton that caught the bridge lights and threw them back in pale blue fragments. It spoke in translated English that was almost perfect, which somehow made it worse. Almost perfect English from a 7-foot insectoid thing felt like a funeral reading delivered by a machine. "Standard stop, standard inspection. Cargo manifest and crew biometrics, please." Pete sent the manifest. Cora sent the crew files. 4 people on a boat meant for 12. Skeleton crew, skeleton budget, skeleton everything. The Drealith officer reviewed the data for 11 seconds. Then, the officer's head tilted. A movement that meant nothing on a human face, but on a Drealith meant the cognitive equivalent of a dog catching a scent. "You have a crew member," the officer said. "Daniel Holt. We require him to disembark." The bridge went quiet. Not silent. The drifter was never silent. She groaned and ticked and hissed like an old dog in its sleep. But the human sounds stopped. "Excuse me?" Pete said. "Daniel Holt, berth 4. We require him to disembark and transfer to our vessel. This is within Article 97 of the Galactic Transit Accord, subsection—" "I know what Article 97 is," Pete said. He didn't actually, but he learned a long time ago that sounding like you know things buys you about 40 seconds. "On what grounds?" "Cultural exchange program," the officer said. The words came out smooth and practiced, a phrase designed in a boardroom somewhere by people who'd never exchanged anything cultural in their lives. "Holt has been selected for voluntary participation in an Imperial exhibition event." "Voluntary," Cora repeated. "Correct. And if he says no?" The Drealith officer paused. It was a small pause, the kind of pause that is itself the answer. "We require him to disembark," the officer said again, same tone, same inflection, as though the question hadn't happened. They boarded 20 minutes later, 3 Drealith soldiers and a scanning technician, who moved through the drifter's corridors like the ship was something they might catch a disease from. They found Danny in the cargo hold, running maintenance on a coolant coupling that had been leaking since Tuesday. He was on his knees when they entered, hands black with grease, a wrench balanced across his thigh. He looked up at the Drealith soldiers the way a man looks up at weather. Not fear, not defiance. Just acknowledgement that something large and indifferent had entered his space. "Danny Holt," the lead soldier said. "Yeah, you will come with us." Danny looked at the wrench on his thigh, looked at the coolant coupling that was still leaking, looked back at the soldier. "Can I finish this first?" He couldn't. They walked him through the drifter's main corridor, toward the airlock where the Drealith shuttle had docked. Pete was there, blocking the passage with his body, in a way that was brave and stupid and completely useless against beings who could fold him like a lawn chair. "This is a human vessel under independent registration," Pete said. "You can't just take my crew." The scanning technician held up a datapad. On it, Danny's face, younger, leaner, meaner, stared out from what looked like old fight footage. Earth-era stuff. A cage with chain-link walls. A crowd pressed against the metal. "Danny In the center of it, fists taped, blood on his teeth, looking at something off-camera, with an expression that had no name in any language Pete spoke. "Your crew member's biometric profile was flagged by our cultural database," the technician said. "He matches the selection criteria for the Imperial exhibition. The process is automated. There is no appeals mechanism at this stage." "At this stage," Cora said from behind Pete. She'd come down from the bridge without making a sound. "Meaning there's an appeals mechanism at some other stage?" "Queries can be directed to the Imperial Bureau of Cultural Affairs on Dralith Prime. Processing time is approximately 4 to 6 standard cycles." 4 to 6 cycles was roughly 8 Earth months. Cora looked at Danny. Danny looked at Cora. Something passed between them that required no words, and would have been ruined by them. She went perfectly still. Not frozen, not scared, but still the way a person goes still when the thing they're afraid of has already happened, and all that's left is to stand inside it. Danny handed Pete the wrench. "Coolant coupling's still leaking," he said. "Third seal from the left. You gotta crank it past where it feels right, then back a quarter turn." "Danny, quarter turn, Pete." He walked through the airlock. The Dralith soldiers flanked him, 2 behind, 1 ahead, and he moved between them without resistance, without hurry, his grease-black hands hanging loose at his sides. He didn't look back. Not because he didn't want to, because looking back is what you do when you think there's something to go back to. And Danny Holt had learned at an age when most kids were learning long division, that looking back only shows you the door closing. The airlock sealed. The drifter shuddered once as the magnetic clamps released. Pete stood in the corridor, holding a wrench, and watching the airlock door like it might reopen if he stared hard enough. It didn't. Doors don't do that. Cora was already back at the comm station, fingers moving across the interface, pulling up embassy contacts, outpost relays, anyone with a signal and a title. Her face was composed, her hands were not. On the shuttle, Danny sat in a seat designed for a body twice his size, and looked out a viewport at the Dralith carrier growing larger with every second. It was a warship dressed up as a government vessel, the way a wolf might put on a crossing guard's vest and expect everyone to feel safe. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know why they wanted him. He knew the look on the scanning technician's face when the fight footage played, though. He'd seen that look before. In promoters, in handlers. In men who looked at other men and saw a product. Danny leaned his head against the viewport. The carrier swallowed the shuttle whole. Somewhere in the ship, a database entry updated. 1 human male. Combat viable. Clearance granted for the Imperial exhibition broadcast. Audience projections, 2.7 billion across 46 systems. Highlight reel, pre-approved. Expected duration of match, under 2 minutes. The convoy was 12 freighters long and moved with the slow, stubborn grace of a line of pack mules that knew the road but didn't enjoy it. Greg Fenton captained the lead ship, a boxy hauler named the Millicent Ray that had been built for function the way a brick is built for function. No elegance, no ambiguity, just a shape that carried things from one place to another. Fenton was 52. His hair had quit before he did, and his face had the permanent squint of the man who had spent 30 years staring at star maps in bad lighting. He ran colony supply routes. Food, water processors, construction materials, medical kits. Boring cargo for a boring man doing a boring job, and that was exactly how he liked it. The Narrows were the fastest path to Haven Colony. Everyone knew that. The Cathari knew that. The route was legal. Fenton had filed his transit plan 6 weeks in advance, as required, and received automated confirmation, as expected. Everything was documented. None of that was going to help him. The 15 Cathari cruisers dropped out of warp in a spread formation, a crescent that opened toward the convoy like a mouth. Each cruiser was 4 times the size of Fenton's largest freighter. Their hulls were the dark green of old bruises, and they bristled with weapon arrays that existed less for combat, and more for the specific psychological effect of being visible. Cathari warship design philosophy was simple: look like something that hurts. Fenton saw them on his scanner and did the math. 15 heavy cruisers against 12 unarmed freighters. He had done this math before. The answer was always the same. "All ships reduce speed," he said into the convoy channel. His voice was flat. "Hold formation. Do not deviate. Do not respond to hails until I do." The lead Cathari cruiser opened a broadband channel, not a private hail, but a wide broadcast, the kind that every ship and listening post within 2 light-years would pick up. Warden Tullax wanted an audience. "Human convoy, you are approaching sovereign Cathari space." Tullax's voice was deep, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once been told no by anything smaller than him. "Your filed transit route passes through restricted corridors. You will reroute through the Geneth bypass." Fenton knew the Geneth bypass. Everyone who ran these routes knew it. It was a detour that added 3 months to the journey. 3 months of additional fuel cost. 3 months of delayed supplies to a colony that needed water processors before their dry season hit. The bypass existed, not because the Narrows were dangerous, but because the Cathari had declared them restricted whenever a human convoy filed for passage, and unrestricted whenever anyone else did. "Acknowledged," Fenton said. One word. He had learned a long time ago that the less you said to a Cathari border patrol, the faster it was over. Dignity was a luxury measured in syllables out here. But Tullax was in no hurry. The cruisers moved closer, close enough that their gravitational wake rattled the freighter's hull plating, close enough that the Millicent Ray's structural warning systems began to chirp, then wail, then scream. Fenton muted them. The noise was the point. The Cathari flew close so you could feel how big they were in your bones. One cruiser passed so near to the 6th freighter in line that its wake buckled a cargo bay door. Non-lethal, non-actionable. Just close enough to say, "We could." Fenton began the slow, humiliating process of adjusting course toward the bypass. He did it with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who was swallowing something that tasted bad, and had decided to swallow it quietly. 300 kilometers off Warden Tullax's port bow, the USS Palehorse drifted in the kind of silence that doesn't exist in nature. Captain Danny Harlow sat in his command chair and watched the entire exchange on a tactical display that showed him things the Cathari couldn't imagine being shown. Every cruiser was tagged, not just identified, but annotated. Shield frequencies, updated in real time. Weapon capacitor charge levels, measured to the decimal. Crew rotation schedules, extrapolated from 6 days of passive observation. The name of every captain. The maintenance history of every engine. The last time Tullax's flagship had recalibrated its sensors, which was 11 days ago, which was why it couldn't see the 2-kilometer warship floating 300 kilometers away. Harlow was 46. He had a face that didn't do much, the kind of face that looked the same whether he was ordering coffee or ordering a torpedo spread. His crew had a private theory that he had been born with exactly one facial expression, and had simply decided it was enough. He watched Fenton's convoy begin to turn, and his jaw moved slightly, which for Harlow was the equivalent of a lesser man throwing a chair. Commander Lisa Pruitt stood at the tactical station to his left. She had been marking the Cathari formation's weak points on her display, not because anyone had asked her to, but because Lisa Pruitt looked at a Cathari battle formation the way a carpenter looks at a piece of wood. She saw where it would split. 16 points of catastrophic vulnerability, she said. Not to anyone in particular. She said it the way someone might say, "Nice weather." At the weapons console, Lieutenant Kyle Odom had his hand resting on the firing board. Not gripping it, resting. But his fingers were drumming a small, rapid pattern against the surface. The unconscious rhythm of a young man whose entire body wanted to do the thing he had trained 3 years to do. Pruitt looked at him. "Odom, ma'am, your hand is doing a thing." Odom looked at his hand. The drumming stopped. His knees started bouncing instead, jackhammering against the underside of his console with the manic energy of a terrier who had been told to sit and was obeying only in the most technical sense. Harlow didn't look at either of them. He watched the convoy turn. He watched Tullax's cruisers circle like dogs that had treed something weak. His orders were specific. They came from Admiral Beckett, and they were not the orders Kyle Odom wanted. They were not the orders any of them wanted. The orders were, observe, record, do not engage, do not reveal. The Pale Horse was not here to save a convoy. The Pale Horse was here to learn exactly how the Cathari operated when they believed no one was watching. And the only way to learn that was to let them believe no one was watching. So Harlow sat and recorded and watched a man named Greg Fenton swallow his dignity on an open channel while 15 warships reminded him of arithmetic. The Pale Horse's sensor suite captured everything. Every frequency Tullax broadcast on. Every gravitational ripple from the cruiser's engines. Every micro-fluctuation in their shield harmonics. 6 days of passive intelligence gathering. And the Cathari had handed it over freely, because you don't guard your secrets from an empty room. And as far as Warden Tullax knew, the room was empty. Pruitt logged the data in a file she had titled, with characteristic understatement, Behavioral Patterns of the Cathari Border Fleet, Volume 12. 12 volumes, 6 days. The Cathari were remarkably consistent in how they bullied people. It was almost professional. The convoy completed its course adjustment. Fenton's last transmission on the broadband channel was a standard compliance confirmation, 5 words long, delivered in the voice of a man who had learned that 5 words was the minimum required to make the Cathari lose interest. Tullax's cruisers peeled away in a lazy arc, already bored. Tullax filed his report that evening. It went to High Commander Zorath Vel's strategic desk, where it would be read by an aide and summarized in a single line. The summary would say that the Narrows were secure and human traffic had been redirected without incident. He added a recommendation at the bottom. Push Earth's recognized border back by another 2 light-years. They won't resist, he wrote. The sentence had the easy confidence of a man who had pushed this particular button a dozen times and never felt it push back. They never do. His censor officer, a junior lieutenant named Dreth Colosi, filed a separate report that same evening. It was flagged as anomalous. During the convoy intercept, a brief shimmer had appeared on the long-range optical feed. A distortion, barely there like heat haze in empty vacuum, where there should be no heat and no haze. It lasted 2 seconds. It did not correspond to any known natural phenomenon. The report was reviewed by Tullax's intelligence section, assigned a code for cosmic ray scatter, and archived. Cosmic rays did strange things in the Narrows. The shimmer was nothing. 1,100 light-years away, in a Rithali listening post that orbited a dying star, Scholar Ivan read the same sensor data. The Rithali had access to border telemetry from most major species, a privilege earned by being small, quiet, and useful to everyone without being threatening to anyone. Ivan looked at the shimmer. She overlaid it against the background radiation profile for that sector. The shimmer did not match cosmic ray scatter. It did not match any natural phenomenon in her database. She saved the file. She did not flag it. She did not share it with her colleagues. She opened a new research folder on her personal drive and named it with a Rithali word that had no direct translation in any galactic trade language. The closest equivalent in human English would be something like the shape of a thing that is trying not to be seen. She added the shimmer to the folder. It was not the first file in the folder. The arena lights hit like a physical thing. White. Absolute. The kind of brightness that doesn't illuminate so much as erase. It bleached the floor, flattened the walls, turned the air itself into something visible and heavy. 42,000 Drelith, and a scattering of other species filled the Colosseum in tiered rows that curved upward like the inside of a skull. And when the lights went full, the crowd noise dropped to a hum that Danny felt in his back teeth. He stood in a tunnel beneath the arena floor. The walls were smooth, pale, humming with a vibration that had no source he could identify. 2 guards flanked him. Nyes Torrens stood ahead, datapad in hand, not looking at him. "When the floor opens, walk forward," she said. "Stop at the center marker. Do not speak to the crowd. Do not make gestures. You are a participant, not a performer." Danny looked down at his hands. Taped, tight. The wraps were clean and white, and they wouldn't stay that way. "Any rules?" he asked. "Stay inside the arena boundary. No weapons, no external assistance. Everything else is permitted." "Everything?" Nis finally looked at him. Her dark exoskeleton caught the tunnel's light and gave nothing back. "The match is designed to end before rules become relevant," she said. The floor above them split open. Light poured down. Sound followed. A wall of noise that wasn't cheering exactly, but something closer to the sound a stadium makes when the entertainment is about to begin, and the entertainment is someone else's pain. Danny walked out. The arena floor was a shifting surface, composite panels that changed texture in sections, some hard and smooth, meant for speed, some loose and granular, like coarse sand meant to slow and trap. The sections shifted on a pattern Danny couldn't read yet, rearranging every few minutes. A floor that fought you while something else was also fighting you. Built for spectacle. Built to make the weaker thing stumble. Danny's feet tested each step. Weight on the ball of his foot. Feeling the surface before committing. The commentators, 2 Drelith voices broadcast across the Colosseum, and every connected system in the galaxy, narrated his entrance with the tone people use when describing a minor curiosity before the main event. They displayed his species stats on floating screens above the arena. No natural armor, no venom glands, no regenerative capability, average lifespan, 78 standard years. Homeworld classification, mid-tier oxygen planet, no strategic significance. Combat rating on the Imperial Index, unranked. The crowd found this amusing. Scattered sounds that might have been laughter rippled through the tiers. Danny reached the center marker. He stood there, bare-chested, taped hands, a body that looked exactly like what it was. A human body, thin-skinned and breakable and completely wrong for this place. He did not look up at the crowd. He did not look at the screens. He looked at the tunnel on the far side of the arena. The tunnel where his opponent would emerge. The sound changed. The hum became a roar, became a rhythm. 42,000 beings stamping or clicking or vibrating in unison. A welcome reserved for champions, for the Empire's proudest product. The far tunnel opened. Orok walked out. He was bigger in person. The footage hadn't captured the weight of him. The way the arena floor dimpled slightly under each step. The way his forearms moved in a coordinated wave like something underwater. His cartilage plating caught the arena lights and turned them golden. He was beautiful the way geological formations are beautiful. Ancient, enormous, completely indifferent to anything smaller than itself. He crossed the arena in 12 steps. Danny counted. They stood facing each other, 10 feet apart. Orok's upper eyes, he had 4, arranged in vertical pairs, locked onto Danny with the calm assessment of a predator, examining something too small to be a threat, but present enough to be a task. Danny looked at the gap beneath Orok's second left arm, right there, between the plates. He'd watched that footage 9 times. The gap was still there. The signal came, not a bell, a frequency, deep, resonant, hitting Danny's chest like a second heartbeat, and then gone. The match had started. No countdown, no ceremony, just a sound, and then everything that followed. Orok charged. Forearms wide, lower pair reaching for a grapple. upper pair cocked back for the strike that would end this in the first 5 seconds. He covered the 10 feet between them in 2 strides. The arena shook. Danny stepped left. Half a step. A pivot. Weight shifting from right foot to left. In a movement so small and precise, it looked like a flinch. Oryx's upper arms cut through the space where Danny had been. The lower arms grabbed air. The crowd made a sound. Not cheering, not booing. A collective intake of breath. The involuntary noise beings make when something doesn't go the way it was supposed to. Oryx turned. He was fast for his size. Danny was already moving, circling right, feet reading the floor. Hard composite here, good footing. He filed that away. Oryx swung with his lower left arm, a sweeping blow meant to catch Danny across the midsection and fold him in half. Danny dropped under it and hit the gap. His taped fist connected with the soft tissue beneath Oryx's second arm, the spot between the plates where the cartilage thinned and the body underneath was just body. It wasn't a hard punch. Danny didn't have the mass for hard punches against something like this, but it was precise in the way that a needle is precise, finding the exact point where armor becomes flesh. Oryx stumbled. 1 step sideways, not from pain, from the simple mechanical surprise of being touched in a place he'd never been touched in combat before. His upper eyes snapped down to the spot Danny had hit, then back up to Danny, and in that microsecond adjustment, that tiny recalculation, the Colosseum saw something that had never appeared on Oryx's face in 9 consecutive victories. Reassessment. The commentators paused. The silence was brief, but it was there, a crack in the professional rhythm of their narration. One of them said something in Drelith that the translation systems rendered as, "The human avoided that." Danny was already moving again, circling. Not running, circling. There's a difference. Running is escape. Circling is geometry. Danny was mapping the arena floor with his feet, cataloging which sections were hard, which were soft, where the transitions happened. Each step was a note in a language only he was reading. Oryx came again, faster this time, angrier though the anger was professional. The irritation of a craftsman whose tool slipped, not genuine rage. He led with all 4 arms in a coordinated pattern that left almost no gap, a technique that had killed his last 3 opponents in under 90 seconds. Danny didn't dodge this time. He caught the lower right arm on his shoulder and let the force spin him, rolling with it instead of breaking against it, using Oryx's own power to carry him out of the strike zone. It hurt. Danny felt something in his shoulder grind in a way shoulders shouldn't grind. But he was behind Oryx now, and Oryx was turning, and turning took time for something that size. Danny hit the gap again, same spot, harder. Oryx made a sound, not a scream, a grunt, deep and involuntary, the kind of sound that comes from a place below language. He spun fast, all 4 arms sweeping, and caught Danny across the chest with a backhand that launched him 6 feet across the arena floor. Danny hit the ground, slid, stopped. The crowd roared. This was the moment, the human broken, the spectacle delivered, the champion triumphant. Highlight reel material. 2 minutes, as promised. Danny got up. Not fast, not dramatic. He put 1 hand on the ground, pushed himself to a knee, then stood. Blood was running from a cut above his left eye where he'd hit the floor. His chest had a red mark shaped like Oryx's fist that would become a bruise the size of a dinner plate by tomorrow, if he had a tomorrow. He raised his hands, guard up, taped fists by his face, feet shoulder width, the stance of a boxer, a thing Oryx had never seen before, from a discipline this side of the galaxy didn't know existed. In the handler's booth above the arena, Nice Torin watched her datapad. Danny's biometrics showed elevated heart rate, adrenaline spike, cortisol flooding, all consistent with a body in crisis. But his movement patterns didn't match. His footwork was controlled. His breathing was deep and timed. Every number said panic. Every action said something else. She leaned forward in her chair without realizing she'd done it. In the arena, Orc looked at the human standing in front of him, bleeding, smaller, fragile in every way the Imperial Index measured fragility, and standing, with his fists up, in a way that wasn't brave and wasn't stupid. It was familiar. It was the stance of something that had been hit before. The commentators had stopped describing the match. They were watching it. Across 46 systems, so was everyone else. In the High Overseer's private suite above the Colosseum, Velthar Sokhan sat in a chair that cost more than the Blackjack Drifter and everything on it. He had been smiling since the match began. The smile was still on his face, but it had stopped reaching the parts of his expression that meant anything. On the broadcast feed, Danny Holt circled right, testing the floor, blood running into his left eye, and not bothering to wipe it. The match was supposed to last 2 minutes. It was at 3 minutes, and climbing. 7 minutes in, Danny figured out the floor. The sections rotated on a cycle, 90 seconds for hard composite, 90 for loose sand, shifting in a spiral pattern that started at the arena's edge and moved inward. Once he saw the pattern, the floor stopped being an enemy and became a clock he could read with his feet. Hard surface coming up on his left in 10 seconds. Soft sand under Oric's next step. Information. Currency. The only kind he'd ever been good at earning. It cost him 4 broken fingers to learn this. The index and middle on his left hand snapped when he'd braced wrong against one of Oric's strikes. They bent sideways at angles that fingers don't volunteer for. And Danny felt each break as a bright, clean line of pain that registered and then filed itself away in a part of his brain that had been accepting these filings since he was 14 years old. The tape held the fingers together, just organized. He was bleeding from his temple, his ribs, and a gash across his left shoulder where Oric's lower arm had caught him on a spin. The blood was warm and constant, and Danny ignored it, the way a person ignores rain once they've accepted they're going to be wet. Oric was breathing harder. Not by much, not in a way the crowd would notice, but Danny noticed. Danny noticed everything about Oric now, because noticing was the only weapon he had, and he'd spent 7 minutes sharpening it. The Vithani champion was built for power. Linear, explosive, devastating power that ended fights in seconds. He was not built for rotation. Every time Danny circled, Oric had to turn his mass to track him, and each turn pulled from an energy reserve that his species replenished slowly. It was the biological equivalent of a car with a massive engine and a small gas tank. Terrifying in a straight line, vulnerable on curves. Danny tightened the circle. He was moving clockwise now, always clockwise, because Oric's right side coordination was faster than his left. And Danny wanted him turning into his weak side, wanted each pivot to be a fraction harder than the last, wanted the fatigue to build in the joints that supported all that armor, all that mass, and all that certainty that this fight should have ended 5 minutes ago. The commentators had abandoned their script. One of them was narrating in real time, voice carrying the particular strain of someone describing something they don't have a framework for. The other had gone quiet. In the 46 systems receiving the broadcast, ratings tracking algorithms were registering numbers that hadn't been projected. Species that had never watched the arena were tuning in. The signal was being captured and rebroadcast by independent networks, faster than the Empire's communications office could track. Something was happening that wasn't on the schedule. Danny came inside Oric's reach again, the same approach he'd used twice before, angling toward the gap beneath the second arm. Oric was ready for it this time. He dropped his lower left arm to guard the spot, exactly as Danny needed him to. Because guarding the gap opened something else. The neck joint, the place where Oric's head met his torso, where the cartilage plates overlapped but didn't seal, where the tissue was thin enough that even a human fist could make it count. Danny drove his forehead into Oryx's neck joint. The headbutt was a desperate, graceless, anatomically stupid thing to do. Danny's skull was not designed for impact against cartilage plating, and the collision split his forehead open along the hairline and sent a ringing through his brain that turned the world into a smeared watercolor for 3 full seconds. But the point of the headbutt was never to hurt Oryx's neck. It was to crack the mandible sensor on the left side of Oryx's jaw, a sensory organ that functioned like a combination of radar and peripheral vision. It cracked. Oryx staggered, not from pain, from the disorientation of losing half his spatial awareness in a single instant, like having someone shut off one of your eyes mid-conversation. His left side went uncertain. He swung wild with his upper arms, compensating, and the swings were wide and uncontrolled, and Danny was already circling left, into the blind spot, into the gap the cracked sensor had opened. The Colosseum had gone silent. Not quiet. Silent. 42,000 beings producing zero sound. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on everything inside it, that turns an arena into a held breath. Danny Holt was losing. By every metric the Dralith used to measure combat performance, damage dealt, physical condition, probability of survival, he was losing catastrophically. His left hand was a swollen mess of tape and broken bone. His ribs screamed with every breath. Blood covered half his face. One eye was almost shut. He moved with a limp that favored his right leg, because his left knee had taken a hit in minute 4 that would have put most species on the ground permanently. But he was still moving, still finding the gaps. And the galaxy, watching through billions of screens, on worlds Danny would never visit, in languages Danny would never speak, began to understand something about humans that had been in the Imperial databases all along, but had never, until this moment, meant anything. The Dralith xenobiology files on humans contained a note, buried in the appendix, marked as a curiosity rather than a threat, about the human pain response. Most species experienced pain as a shutdown signal, a command to stop, retreat, protect. Humans experienced it too, the note said, but their nervous system included a secondary pathway, a chemical cascade that activated under sustained duress, and did something that the Dralith scientists had described in clinical language that failed to capture what it looked like in practice. It let them keep going. Not through the pain, not past it, with it. Their bodies absorbed damage and recalibrated in real time, adjusting stance and balance and strategy around each new injury as it happened, integrating the broken parts into a revised operating system that wasn't as good as the original, but was functional enough to continue. Humans didn't have natural armor because they were never meant to avoid damage. They were built to take it and adapt between one hit and the next, built to function while broken. In theory, this was an unremarkable evolutionary footnote. In practice, broadcast live across the galaxy, illustrated by a man who would not stop getting up, it was something else entirely. It was terrifying. On conquered worlds, in occupied territories, in refugee stations, and labor camps, and underground meeting rooms where subjugated species gathered to share what little they had, people were watching. They watched Danny Holt circle on broken legs and hit with broken hands and bleed from places he couldn't count, and they felt something move in their chests that had been still for a long time. Not hope. Hope was too clean for this. What they felt was raw, older, a recognition, the understanding that the thing the Empire called weakness, the softness, the fragility, the lack of armor, was not what they'd been told. That the creature on their screen, the one classified as unranked, was doing something that none of the Empire's champions had ever been asked to do. He was being destroyed, and he was still there. In the High Overseer's suite, Velthar Sokhan stood at the viewport overlooking the arena, His crystalline exoskeleton caught the arena lights, but he wasn't glowing. Still in the particular way that powerful beings go still when they realize that the thing they built has started doing something they didn't design it to do. "Cut the broadcast," he said. His communications officer, a young Dralith with the uncomfortable posture of someone delivering bad news, consulted his screen. "The signal has been captured by at least 40 independent networks, High Overseer. Cutting now would what?" Velthar said. "Amplify it. The narrative becomes suppression rather than spectacle. Our projections indicate—" "I know what your projections indicate." Velthar looked down at the arena. Danny was circling again, clockwise, limping, bleeding, hands up. The tape on his left fist was dark red now, soaked through, and the fist was still closed. A single voice cut through the silence of the commentary booth. One of the Dralith commentators, speaking not to the audience, but to no one in particular, in a voice stripped of performance. The translation systems picked it up and rendered it across 46 systems in 12 languages. "What is he?" On the Blackjack Drifter, 3 days away and useless as a paper shield, Cora Briggs had found the broadcast. She sat at the comm station, with both hands flat on the console, watching the feed on a screen designed for cargo manifests and shipping routes. The resolution was poor. The signal was choppy. It didn't matter. She could see Danny. She could see what they were doing to him. She could see him getting up. Pete stood in the doorway behind her. He'd come in when the broadcast started. He'd watched for 4 minutes. Then he'd left the room, because watching a man you know being beaten on a screen you can't reach through is a thing the human mind will only tolerate for so long before it starts breaking furniture. Cora didn't leave. She watched with the fierce, dry-eyed focus of someone who had decided that if Danny was going to stand there and take it, the least she could do was not look away. On the screen, Danny took another hit, went down, got up. Her hands pressed harder against the console. The metal was cold and she could feel it, and feeling it meant she was here, and being here meant this was happening, and it was happening to Danny, and she could not do a single thing about it except watch. 12 minutes. The match had lasted 12 minutes. No one in the Colosseum's recorded history had survived Orc for 12 minutes. The record before Danny belonged to a Kreth berserker who'd lasted 4.5, and they'd built a statue of that Kreth on his homeworld. Danny didn't know this. He didn't know much of anything at the 12-minute mark, except the floor under his feet, the sound of his own breathing, and the location of Orc's blind spot. Everything else had become noise. His left knee had stopped working as a knee somewhere around minute 9 and had reclassified itself as a hinge that operated on stubbornness and swelling. His broken fingers had gone numb, which was a mercy, though the mercy was the kind that comes with a bill. His ribs were doing something wet and wrong every time he inhaled. The cut above his eye had reopened twice, and the blood was a curtain he had to blink through, painting the world in a red that was almost artistic if you didn't think about what it meant. He circled. Clockwise. Always clockwise. Orc had stopped chasing. That was the thing the commentators couldn't explain, the thing the crowd couldn't process, the thing that would be replayed on analysis feeds for years in languages Danny would never learn. The champion had stopped chasing. He stood near the center of the arena, his 4 arms at his sides, his cracked mandible sensor flickering with damaged electrical impulses, and he watched the humans circle him with an expression that the Dralith commentators had no word for, because the Vithani weren't supposed to make that expression. He looked uncertain. Not tired, not injured, uncertain, as though the rules he'd fought under for 9 consecutive victories had been quietly replaced with different rules while he wasn't looking, and the new rules didn't make sense, and the thing in front of him, bleeding, limping, taped fists raised in a guard position that no species in the Imperial Index used, was operating under a logic his training had never prepared him for. Danny came inside again. The same angle. The same approach toward the gap beneath the second arm that Orc had now been guarding for 6 straight minutes, burning energy he couldn't spare to protect a spot the size of a human palm. Danny feinted left. Orc's guard shifted. Danny didn't go for the gap. He hit Orc in the cracked mandible sensor, an open palm strike, driven from the shoulder, connecting with the damaged sensor housing with a wet, crunching sound that the arena microphones broadcast across the galaxy in high fidelity. Orc's head snapped sideways. His spatial awareness, on the left side, already compromised, went dark. Full blind spot now. Half the world gone. Orc roared. The sound was enormous, a frequency that shook the arena floor and rattled the viewport glass in the handler's booth, where Nis Torin stood, with both hands pressed flat against the console. It was the first time in 9 fights that Orc had made that sound. It was a sound that meant the fight had become something other than professional. He hit Danny with everything. 4 arms coordinated in a sequence that was less technique and more avalanche. A full-body commitment to ending this, to burying this broken thing that wouldn't stop standing up, that wouldn't stop circling, that wouldn't stop finding the gaps. The upper arms came down in hammer strikes. The lower arms caught Danny around the midsection. The impact lifted Danny off the ground and drove him backward, and the trajectory ended at the arena wall. Danny hit the barrier at speed. The sound was dull and final. He dropped to the floor like a thing with no bones. The crowd erupted. 42,000 voices releasing 12 minutes of accumulated tension in a single explosion of sound that was relief and celebration, and something underneath both that nobody wanted to examine too closely. The commentators surged back to life, highlight reel activated, graphics spinning, the champion victorious, the spectacle delivered, late, embarrassingly late, but delivered. Danny lay on the arena floor. He lay there for 3 seconds, 4, 5. The crowd noise peaked and began to settle into the satisfied hum of a conclusion. Orc turned toward the Overseer's suite, forearms spread in the champion's salute. The broadcast began its post-match graphics package. Danny's right hand moved. It pressed flat against the floor. The taped knuckles were black with dried blood, and the fingers beneath them were crooked and wrong. But they pressed flat and held, and then his left hand came up, the broken one, the useless one, and it pressed flat too, and Danny pushed, one knee, then the other. The crowd noise died, not gradually, at once, like someone had reached into 42,000 throats and pulled the sound out by the root. Danny stood up. He swayed. His body was a catalog of damage, a textbook illustration of what happens to soft tissue and thin bone when it meets something it was never designed to meet. His left eye was sealed shut. His breathing was a shallow, ragged thing that sounded like tearing paper. The tape on both hands was soaked through to the color of rust. He raised his guard, fists up, feet apart. The stance that had been drilled into him in a gym in Tucson by a man whose name he sometimes said in his sleep and never said while awake. He stood there. Orc turned around. The champion's salute froze mid-gesture. He looked at Danny the way a person looks at a mathematical error, a thing that shouldn't exist, that violates the rules as he understands them, that demands a recalculation he doesn't know how to perform. The Colosseum was silent. Not the excited silence of before, a different kind, heavier, the silence of a very large room full of beings who are witnessing something they don't have a category for. Orc did not advance. His forearms lowered slowly to his sides. His upper eyes stayed locked on Danny, and then they moved. Up, to the Overseer's suite, to Velthar Sokon, a look that crossed species and language and biology to communicate a single, unmistakable thing. He was asking to stop. Not because he couldn't finish it, because what he was being asked to do had changed shape somewhere in the last 12 minutes, and become something that didn't fit inside the word combat anymore. Orc had killed 9 opponents. He had never stood across from one who was already destroyed and still present. His culture, his training, his entire psychological architecture had been built around the idea that breaking something makes it stop. Danny Holt was broken in ways that would take months to heal, and he was standing in the center of the arena with his fists up, and the gap between those two facts was a space that Orc could not cross. Velthar Sokon sat in his suite. His crystalline exoskeleton was perfectly still. 40 independent networks were broadcasting. Billions were watching. The narrative had left his control 9 minutes ago, and every second it continued, the damage compounded. The termination signal. A frequency rolled across the arena. The same chest-deep tone that had started the match, now carrying a different harmonic. End. Done. Over. Official ruling. Inconclusive. No kill awarded. No victory declared. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't boo, made no sound at all. They sat in the Colosseum like passengers in a vehicle that had taken a turn they hadn't expected and was now somewhere they didn't recognize. Danny stood in the center of the arena, bleeding, swaying, breathing in torn paper gasps. He didn't raise his fists in triumph, didn't collapse, didn't do anything that would make a good graphic or a clean narrative. He just stood there, being alive, which was both the least and the most remarkable thing a person can do. Nice Torin was standing in the handler's booth. She didn't remember getting up. Her datapad was on the floor, where it had fallen from hands that had apparently decided, without consulting her, to let it go. On her screen, Danny's biometrics scrolled in columns of numbers that all said the same thing. This body should not be standing. The body disagreed. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she looked down at the arena, at the human standing alone in all that white light, and she felt something in her chest that she would spend the next several weeks trying to name, and failing. They returned Danny to the Blackjack Drifter 11 hours later. Not released, returned. The distinction mattered to Pete Vargas, who noted it in his log with the bitter precision of a man who understands that language is how empires hide what they do. A shuttle docked. The airlock opened. Danny walked through it. Cora was there. She didn't speak. Neither did he. She stepped forward and took his weight on her shoulder, the right one, the side that had less damage, though less was relative, and walked him down the corridor toward the medical bay. His feet moved because her feet moved. His body followed hers because it had forgotten how to lead, and she hadn't forgotten how to carry. That was the scene. That was everything it needed to be. Pete filed a formal complaint with Earth's colonial embassy. 3 weeks later, he received a response expressing deep concern and a gift basket of synthetic fruit. He set the basket on the cargo bay floor and shot it with a flare gun. This accomplished nothing practical, but improved his mood for the rest of the day. Nice Torin submitted a transfer request to the Imperial Bureau of Personnel 4 days after the match. Reason listed: personal. The request was granted without review, because processing clerks don't ask questions about things they don't want the answers to. She kept one item from her time at the arena, a still frame capture from the broadcast, pulled from the handler's booth feed at higher resolution than the public version. It showed Danny's face in the half-second after the final blow, before he started getting up. Not determination, not grit, not any of the words the independent networks would later use in their analysis segments. Just a face doing the math on what comes next. Just a man calculating whether his arms would hold him if he pushed. They held. Velthar Sokon issued a directive banning human participants from all future Imperial exhibition events. The official language cited logistical incompatibility with current arena formatting. The directive was brief, bureaucratic, and carried the specific tone of a document written by someone who is afraid of something, and has decided to make it illegal instead of understanding it. Within 36 hours of the broadcast, the phrase appeared. Nis heard it first, in a supply depot canteen, spoken by a Vrethki dock worker who'd probably never met a human in person. She heard it again, on a shuttle. Again, in a transmission intercepted by Imperial intelligence and flagged for cultural monitoring. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a rallying cry. It was just a thing that people said now, in languages Danny Holt would never speak, on worlds he would never visit, in contexts that ranged from quiet defiance to open rebellion, to the simple, private act of getting out of bed on a morning when getting out of bed felt impossible. Holt stood up. 3 words, small enough to fit in any mouth, large enough to crack an empire's certainty that staying down was the only rational response to being hit. On the Blackjack Drifter, 2 weeks out from Kepler Station, Danny sat in the cargo hold with his back against the wall, and his hands resting on his thighs. His left hand was splinted. His ribs were wrapped. The bruising on his chest had faded from purple to the sick yellow-green of healing tissue that isn't done being angry about what happened to it. Cora sat next to him. Not close, close enough. She was reading a datapad, shipping manifests, inventory logs, the ordinary paperwork of ordinary life, continuing after the extraordinary has passed through it. The coolant coupling was still leaking, 3rd seal from the left. Danny looked at it, looked at his splinted hand, looked at the wrench on the tool rack across the hold. He'd get to it tomorrow. Outside the viewport, the galaxy moved in its slow, vast turning. Stars and stations and worlds full of beings who had watched a man stand up when standing was the hardest thing his body had ever done, and who had felt in watching it something shift inside them that would not shift back. The drifter hummed. Danny closed his eyes. He was alive. That was enough.